Good evening and welcome to the Broadcast Network and tonight's webinar. Our theme for this month is Pacing a Church Plant, and tonight we're going to be listening to Colin Baron, one of the founders of the Broadcast Network and church planting gurus, and his topic is going to be Pace is more important than you realise. If you're listening live, then a special welcome to you, and if you're joining in for the first time, then let me just explain the format of these sessions. Like I said, in a moment we'll hand over to Colin, who will share with us for about half an hour. During that time, and indeed for the whole time that we're live, you can message us your questions for the second part of the Hangout by clicking on the questions button that you'll see on your screen. This means when Colin's finished speaking, I can put your questions to him, whether you're seeking clarity on something that he's shared or about something relating to this theme. So I hope that sets the scene for the next hour, and all that remains is for me to hand over to you, Colin. The stage is yours.
Thanks, Hannah. It's great to be on broadcast this evening, and especially on this whole topic of pace. I often get people ask me loads of different questions on how to plant a church, and invariably related to the question somewhere is the whole thing of pace. And so I want to look at pace from a biblical perspective in terms of how God created the world in terms of the rhythms in pace. And then I want to look at some practical examples from 4 cities that are mentioned in the Bible. And so just want to introduce this theme actually from a couple of illustrations, and one of them is from soccer. And those who are listening from outside of England and the United Kingdom, I'll put some context to this. Last summer the England football team were part of the tournament for the European Cup, and in the summer we played a number of matches, and then one match in particular we played the smallest country in the region, and that was Iceland, and we lost by, and it was humiliating, and in such a way that the manager resigned and we got a new manager. And as the new manager was appointed, he got asked numbers of questions, invariably what went wrong. And one of his answers related to the subject that we're talking about tonight. And he said, look, in England we have a Premier League which actually is played soccer at a very high tempo all the way through the season. And then in a lot of other countries, over the Christmas period, they close down for 2 or 3 weeks. Great, but in England we do completely opposite. We have an insane number of matches over the Christmas and New Year period. And so basically what I'm saying is this, that the UK, the England soccer season is played at a high tempo all the time with no breaks. And then when you come to a summer and a cup competition, all the players are exhausted. And so he said that that was one of the reasons that he thinks we got knocked out by a very, very small country. A couple of days ago, I was reading an article, and I just want to just quote this. It was an article from a runner, and talking about themselves. And it says this: one of the most important aspects of running is learning how to pace yourself. For starters, you have to pace your overall training, and when working towards an upcoming race, it's important not to push yourself too hard. Training properly involves a gradual progression of miles and speed. Pushing yourself too hard, too fast, will ultimately result in injury and burnout. Then the writer went on to say another way a runner paces themselves is during the actual race itself. And then they said for them personally, that they have an easier time pacing themselves in training than they do in the actual race. And they went on to say that during the race they get so excited about what is happening that they lose perspective and actually go too fast to start with. And then, as it's a long distance race, actually burn themselves out before the end. And it's almost the event, they just get caught up in the atmosphere, in the other runners. And so, saying that actually the event sometimes was harder than training. But in both incidences, whether it was the soccer tournament, whether it was uh, the running race, the whole ability to pace yourself so that actually you're there at the end and you're winning at the end is massively important. And I feel for a lot of church planters, pace is an important thing. So I know for me, when I first started church planting 30 years ago now, I was so excited. I just wanted it to happen. And so it was almost like I had meeting upon meeting upon meeting, and you were just pushing all the time. And then you kind of analysed, is anybody coming? Or is anybody getting saved? What's happening here? And not a lot. And so the temptation then to push again harder, actually. And so in the end, you get to a point where you're exhausted, and then there's an opportunity. It's Christmas, it's Easter. There's new students arriving. Times when actually you could really up the pace, but by that time you're actually very tired and actually want a holiday and a break. And so, as I said at the beginning, I want to look at pace from a kind of a biblical perspective. In terms of how God kind of orders society and creation. And then I want to look at 4 towns, cities, and how the people of God learned to pace themselves in those cities. So let's look at some biblical principles. The first one is from Ecclesiastes. It says these, Ecclesiastes 3:1, there is a time for everything and a season for every activity under heaven. And so the whole thing of seasons gives us some perspective and some understanding of the rhythm of life. I live in Manchester, and Manchester is known in the summer for its rain, and it's also known for a little bit of sun. But this kind of humid atmosphere that is created in the summer months actually produces a lot of growth. I'm always cutting the lawn. It's kind of never ending because growth in those conditions, a lot of moisture, a bit of warmth, actually really does make things grow fast. At the moment it's autumn, walking my dog in the mornings, leaves are coming down, things are beginning to slow up, and then soon we'll be moving into winter when actually another season going in to spring. And so I just first of all want to say that built into creation, built into the way God has designed things, there are seasons. Some things are going fast, and then sometimes dormant, things going slow. There's probably 1 or 2 examples where that's kind of contradicted, if I can use that word. It's probably not the right word. In Amos 9:13 it says, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when the reaper will overtake the plowman and the planter, the one treading grapes. And so in terms of revival and renewal, then actually the whole thing speeds up and things change. But that whole thing of the rhythm of life to give us an understanding of how we should actually pace our own lives. Second thing is the festivals that God gave the people of God these festivals to go to. And when I was a young church planter, I went to one of the big Bible weeks that they used to run in the UK, and I heard a speaker just talk about these festivals and saying that actually not only were they a time for worship and praise and the people of God to gather in great celebration, but it was actually their holiday time as well. And Deuteronomy 14:22 gives some instructions for the people of God. It said, be sure to set aside 1/10 of all the fields that you produce each year. Eat the tithe of your grain, the new wine, the oil, and the firstborn of your herds and flocks. And basically what it encouraged me to do was to think, okay, for the people of God going to these festivals, they took time off work, but they also put money aside so that when they went, they actually had provision, they could have a great festival. And so we actually started putting a tithe aside actually as well for our holidays, so that as a young family we could take some really good breaks and actually put some rhythm into our year, so that we could put a lot into the church plan and then take some good holidays. And so that was kind of the second thing of pace, the whole thing of holidays, festivals. The third, which you probably thought I might have started with, which is the whole thing of Sabbath. By the seventh day, it says in Genesis, God finished the work he had been doing, and on the seventh day rested from all his work, and God blessed the seventh day and made it holy. So here's the whole thing of the Sabbath rest. And we know through the Old Testament that that Sabbath rest actually got a bit twisted and became a load of rules and regulations. And so what really started out as something to benefit people actually became quite a burden. And Jesus, in the end, was challenged as he was picking some corn. Why are you doing that on the Sabbath? And he said, the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. And so I just want to, again, pick this theme up that we need Sabbath rest. We need those time. Now, for a lot of church planters, especially in today's busy society and economically challenged times for a lot of people are bivocational. That means they're actually working in the marketplace to earn money, and then the church planting is actually in their spare time, which means Monday to Friday often busy at work, few evening meetings, and Sunday can be busy as well. So to actually take a time off and making Saturdays work for you is really important. For me, we've had the privilege of being paid by the church, and so I tend to take a midweek day off, which works for the way our family is. But I guess taking that whole thing of making the Sabbath work for you. The Sabbath was made for man, and so just want to say that. So that's built into the way God wants us to order our life. And then just final bit before we go into some of the practical stuff in terms of the cities I want to mention. There's a time of waiting. It says, wait on the Lord and keep his ways, and he shall exalt you to inherit the land. Psalm 37:4. And so sometimes we just need to stop. And that's very hard for energetic, go-to people. And I know for myself, sometimes I want to force an issue. I want to make something happen. Sometimes I get frustrated, and so I kind of put more effort into it. And actually, what God's saying is actually wait for the Lord and keep his way, and he shall exalt you and to inherit the land. And so they're just very briefly, because we've only got half an hour in this talk, just 4 kind of biblical principles of how God has put pace into our lives and into the rhythm of life. So now I just want to look at kind of 4 examples, 1 from the Old Testament and then 3 from Paul, church planting in the New Testament, that will give us some examples of pace and how to do that. So the first one, the lesson is actually from Babylon, and it's from the people of God in exile, going down to be 70 years in another nation. And the words came to Jeremiah, and he gave them these words to the people. He said, build houses, settle down, plant gardens, and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons. Give your daughters in marriage, so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number, do not increase. Also seek the peace and prosperity of the city. And so for a lot of church planters, they actually move home. We've moved, I think, 3 or 4 times now. planted a lot of churches, but actually moved physically 3 or 4 times. One of those, actually, we moved to America for 2 years to help a church that we'd been involved in, who had planted 2 or 3 churches, and we went to give them some more intentional hands-on help. And I remember having been there a few months, a friend of ours turned up and came and heard me preach on the Sunday morning. And at the end of it, she said, "Colin, that was an amazing preach." It's always good to say that to you. But it was amazing in this way. She said, "You used all your illustrations were all from the USA." And I realized that as I got there, I immersed myself in the culture, in the politics, in all aspects I could of North American. We lived on the East Coast, about an hour's drive to Boston. We loved Boston, and so we would visit there. We would enjoy the scenery, which is just stunning in that area. And I guess what I'm trying to say is a bit like Jeremiah said to the people of God, go into exile. Actually, love the city, bless the city, prosper the city. And for a lot of church planters, they're so keen on building the church, they lose the fact that actually part of pacing yourself is actually to spend time enjoying the place you're in. Because I believe this, if you do not love the place you're in, it's very difficult to build a church. I was in St. Petersburg a few years ago. Some dear friends of mine had moved there to plant a church, and I went out there to give them support. And it was interesting. I said to them, I don't want to go to a meeting. I want to go with you to some of the really beautiful parts of St. Petersburg. And that wasn't just because I wanted to do a tourist thing, although that was an added bonus, but I actually wanted them to spend time and to learn some principles, a little bit like Jeremiah wanted the people of God to learn. That actually, if they were going to plant into that beautiful city, they needed to get to know it. So we went to the ballet, we went to the big museums, we went down the main high streets, we went down to the river, just spent a day or two just really enjoying talking about photographing, just really appreciating this great city, and actually beginning to talk to people, feeling like, okay, this can be home. And so it was a principle, and that's pace, you see, because if you've got to slow down to do that. You've actually got to take time. Nehemiah, it says, spent days walking around the walls of Jerusalem, just getting a perspective of the place he was going to. So for the people of God going to Babylon, actually loving the place they were going to, in terms of it was a foreign land, it was a place of oppression actually for them, but actually they wanted to prosper the city, and they needed to actually find a home there, make it their home, as opposed to always pining to go back, which they did in the end, 70 years on. So that's the first lesson. Second lesson I want to do from Corinth. And it's an interesting one, this, because Paul turns up in Corinth. We find this in Acts 18 and 19. And he actually gets there ahead of his colleagues, Silas and Timothy. And here's Paul, this colossal theologian, church planter, preacher. And so what does he do when he arrives there? Well, actually, he doesn't get on to doing lots of evangelism, lots of church building. In fact, he starts a business or joins 2 people that he meets there, Aquila and Priscilla, and actually gets into doing a business. And then it says every Sabbath he went down to the synagogue and he debated in the synagogue and he taught in the synagogue. And it's interesting, he didn't even create a new meeting. He actually went to where he would probably go anyway, which was where the people of God were gathering. And so for Paul, knowing that he was on his own, he was waiting for his team to arrive, he did little in terms of that kind of church planting stuff that he was going to do a bit later. But actually, what he did do, he used his time really profitably. He earned money, built the business, but he discipled two people as he was earning money. So he went to the synagogue like you'd probably do, and he actually sat and made these tents with two people who actually became key church planters with him. So what do we learn by in terms of pace? We learn that you do things simply when you first get to a place. You don't over make too many commitments, too many meetings, and you actually use the opportunity, especially in bivocational employment, to get to know people, even to disciple people in the workplace, and wait for your team to come. When we first came to Manchester, we turned up, we had to wait for people to come, and so we did very little those first few months. So that's how it started, Corinth. And then it says, when Silas and Timothy arrived, it says he devoted himself to the work. And so it's interesting. Suddenly he went from one skirmish in the synagogue and some a discipling of a couple to devote himself. That means that there was a season where he could actually stop his business and actually give real time and energy with Silas and Timothy to building the church. So you see, if he had tried to do that on his own to start with, he wouldn't have had the money to be able to do that with. And he also may have got himself burnt out because he'd been on his own. So took his time, and then he devoted. And then the interesting thing is, he then took a breath in terms of took a step back and started to think, what do I do next? And in this frenetic, devoted time of building his church, he realized, because of persecution and difficulties, let's just take a step back and say, okay, God, what do I do now? And it says, actually, God spoke to him in a vision. Do not be afraid. Keep on speaking, for I am with you. And so in this whole pace, Paul took a step back and said, okay, God, what do I do now? And actually God said, carry on. Keep going at this pace. And so fundamentally, he had the energy, because knowing what God's saying gives you energy to keep the pace a little longer. I found that when God speaks, actually I can keep going, and I can go that extra mile, because somehow there's an energy that comes from knowing that God is with you and that actually there's fruit coming from this. So we've got some great examples from Corinth. I just encourage you to read the narrative through Acts 18, and it just gives you so many clues in terms of how to pace yourself, when to go slow, when to press on, and when to keep pressing on in the right time. So next lesson I just want to look at is lesson from Ephesus. So that's Corinth, Ephesus. So after Paul left Corinth, he took actually Aquila and Priscilla with him, and it says in Acts 18:19, they arrived at Ephesus where Paul left Priscilla and Aquila. So it's interesting, he takes them there, and then he says to them, look, I'm going to go and support some of the churches. I'm going to go back to some of the churches that I planted. And so he said, I will come back if it's God's will. And then he set sail. So here's Aquila and Priscilla. They're on their own. So what did they do? Well, actually, they did almost what Paul did in Corinth. They went to the synagogue. They started a business, I think, and they met a guy called Apollos. And so basically they spent their time helping Apollos, training him a bit, and this mighty man of God, Apollos, actually was very impacted by Aquila and Priscilla. It's almost like it was their major thing that they did. I'm sure there are other things as well. But fundamentally, again, when Paul had gone and they were on their own there, they didn't try and do a load of stuff. And I guess I'm trying to say they'd learned some lessons from Paul coming to Corinth. But then on Paul's return, it says he upped the pace. It says in Acts 19:8, Paul entered the synagogue. He's now come back to Ephesus and spoke boldly there for 3 months, arguing persuasively about the kingdom of God. But some of them became obstinate and they refused to believe. and public malign the way. So Paul left them, and he took the disciples with him and had the discussions daily in the lecture hall of the Tyrannus. This went on for 2 years. So here's an amazing thing happening from what I would say was a bit of a skirmish in the early days with Aquila and Priscilla. Some great things, but, on a kind of individual basis almost. Suddenly Paul comes in and he has the opportunity, because he's thrown out of, he has to leave the synagogue. He finds a lecture hall that he could use every afternoon. And so Paul really, really ups the pace now, every afternoon. I think it's about the only time we see it in this sort of format. It says he lectured in the hall of Tyrannus. And then in another place it says the whole of Asia, actually in the end, heard the gospel out of this place. And so can you kind of get the drift here that I'm trying to talk about pace, that you up the pace when significant things are in place. So for Paul in Corinth, the significant thing was actually Silas and Timothy turned up. And so he had the right team, and they could all be full-time, and he had the resources, he had earned the money, said he supported his team in another part of the Bible, and so he could devote himself in Corinth then to what he was only doing on the Sabbath in the synagogue. He could do it on a much more daily basis. So it was the team that actually gave him that ability to do it, and he had the energy because he hadn't killed himself before that to do it. In Ephesus, he had a hall. Not only had his team, but he actually had a space that he could use that seemed really appropriate for him. So he used that lecture hall and just every day debated, reasoned, saw people saved, just discipled, and people were sent out, Laodicea and other places to plant churches. And so again, just getting that whole thing of each church plant, there's going to be seasons of slow growth, seasons of slow activity, and then seasons of intense activities. And it's knowing the time and also being able to stop even in a time of tense activity and saying, God, is it still time? Is it still the right thing for us to do? And then just as I'm beginning to bring this to a close, I want to do a lesson from Troas. Okay, and in 2 Corinthians 2:12, I find this just a fascinating verse. It says, "Now I went to Troas to preach the gospel of Christ and found that the Lord had opened a door for me. I still had no peace of mind because I did not find my brother Titus there. So I said goodbye to them and went to Macedonia." I find this an absolute intriguing verse, and actually a liberating verse, because he says, now I went to Troas to preach. So he intentionally went there. And then basically it says God opened the door. The Lord opened the door. I mean, I could imagine me going to my leadership team here and saying, I actually went to a place and God opened the door. And you know what they would actually say to me? Tell us the fruit. Tell us what happened there. Oh, I didn't go in because one of you didn't turn up. I mean, that would be a very interesting conversation. But that's exactly what Paul did, because somehow he knew that for him to go in and do the work, he needed to have the right team with him. And so he had the ability, in the face of what looked like an open door, to actually not do it. I think for church planters, this is a massive lesson, because often we have what seems open doors. Often people come to me and say, Colin, can we do this? There's an old folks home that actually wants us to do a carol service when they're in Christmas. That could easily happen. Or there's an opportunity here to do some street work, or there's a children's club. Could we start a children's club? And it looks like God's in it. And I think to myself, we can't do all those things. We haven't actually got the right people in place, and actually saying no to something that looks good is a very difficult thing, especially as a church planter, and you're trying to get some traction. But somehow Paul understood certain things, certain principles need to be in place for you to do it. And I would say sometimes we up the pace at the wrong time because it looks like an open door. It looks like even God's opened the door, as it says here in Trials. But actually, you haven't got everything in place. And what happens then is you get burnt out, you put energy that actually could be used in somewhere else in the wrong place. And so I think I'm just hoping to give you some clues that actually there is a rhythm of life, that actually God has intended, that we do have fast times, slow times, we have rest times, and we have high intensity times, and we have lots of times in the middle, which is just plod, okay? And a lot of life is just plod. But also that there's some key it's key lessons to know when to up the pace. And so sometimes I go into a church plant situation. I did this week, and it's doing well. But actually, I was challenging a little bit. Could you up the pace a little bit? Is this a season to up the pace? So often I'm going in and saying, actually, you just need to have a bit of a break here. But I think sometimes you need to just put a bit more shoulder to it, because actually if you up the pace a bit, you could have a bigger breakthrough. So knowing the times and the seasons, knowing your family life. For us, raising 3 kids, we've got 6 grandkids now. So there's different seasons in family life as well that actually just mean you've got to pace things well according to the community you're in, according to the church community, and according to your own family nuclear community. I think all very important. I guess this will just pose quite a lot of thought in your mind. So we'll call it and answer some questions now.
Fabulous. Right, fantastic, Colin. We've definitely got a few questions on this topic. So if you're listening live and you want to add your question onto the list, then over the next kind of 25 minutes is your opportunity to do that. So please do. Let's start then at the top, always a good place. The question first is this then. How do you work out whether you need to go faster or slower with your church plant?
That's almost an impossible question to answer in a principle. I think one of the reasons to take 4 towns, like I did 4 cities, was to show that there are some principles at play. Some of it is just how you're feeling yourself. First of all, how is it with your family? So sometimes just knowing that your spouse, your kids are actually needing your attention more, that's a clue. Okay, knowing that you've got the right people in the right place, that's a clue. Knowing God's spoken, like He did in Corinth. So sometimes for me, just prophecy, just knowing actually God's spoken. So we started a church plant in Manchester when we were really a bit pushed, actually, but we felt God has spoken to us, and so actually that just we up the pace on that. Being wise, having wise counsel is helpful. Listening to people. Sometimes you can up the pace for bursts. So we're now in Manchester. We've got a number of church plants. There's going to be a burst now up till the week before Christmas, and then last year we virtually closed down for 2 weeks, lots of hours. This time, because of the Sunday, Christmas Day and New Year's Day falling on Sunday, we'll just do a plod. So I don't know if that helps, but everything's reasonably situational,
Yeah.
uh, but it is being wise,
Yeah.
getting good counsel, but not being scared, I think, to go the extra mile sometimes, like Paul did in Corinth,
Yeah.
sometimes,
There's quite a
sometimes,
number of different factors to consider.
yeah, but yeah,
Okay, well, that's helpful because the question that comes with it is this then, how do you help the other people either up the pace or slow down as you feel that it should be, set?
that's an interesting, very interesting question. Um, I'll, Let me just give you a side illustration, then come back to it just because I think it will illuminate. Um, in as a day job for myself, as well as planting churches, I actually help leadership teams grow churches. And one of the things that I'm often helping them is how they raise volunteers, how they delegate. And one of the things people say to me is everybody's too tired. That's or I don't want to over pressurize them. Okay, so these are, and so I'm thinking, okay, well, is that totally true? And then I kind of asked the question of this: when to the leaders, when do you grow the most? And some of them say, well, actually, when we're stretched, when we're under pressure. And so, what I basically I've come to the conclusion in this context I'm talking about, then I'll put it into church planting, is that actually this is one of my things: is too much pressure snaps people; they break down. But too little pressure actually makes them bored. And actually, you can be as tired being bored as you can under pressure. Okay, so
Yeah.
that's a little bit of a principle. So so sometimes we've got to encourage. We've got to be very wise to figure out why are people tired, and why sometimes are they do they need, is it good for them to step up? And so I try and analyze it a little bit, and it's only on a situational basis. So for sometimes you just think these people have been working hard week in, week out. They just need a break.
Mm.
Other times, actually, it's because they're not seeing the fruit. So
Yeah.
you can actually hope deferred makes the heart grow sick. So sometimes people are just weary because of lack of growth, lack of results. And actually, upping the tempo a bit and getting some traction actually brings energy. So I was a church planter the other day and hadn't seen many people come, then seen a couple of families join it. And the whole of the little church plant team is motivated. And it's like energy comes back. So sometimes you've got to say, okay, you might be tired, but a win actually will bring energy. No, it, that's why I use that illustration. Too much, and you could snap people, they could burn out. But if they actually say too little, it's a little bit like hope deferred.
Yeah. That makes, yeah, I get that.
Is that? I don't know if that's. I'm trying to give some principles because every single situation is different.
Yeah, well, no, it's really helpful because we've got another bit that adds on, actually goes on from what you're saying, which is what should you do? Because obviously we're helping others to come with us in terms of the pace. But what if you've got conflict and you've got some people that are wanting to go faster than you think? So you've actually got a slight mismatch of, different ideas about the pace and the people that are coming with you.
And I think that you're going to always have that. Okay, I say, that's um, wow. These are good questions, and I don't want to give trite answers, and I don't want to give because I say so much is situational, and
Yeah.
you've got that. But I think sometimes you've got to give permission for people to be their own pace. So, for instance, if you've got a bit of And most churches have, to be fair, and because church plants are very small, it's more, everything is more highlighted. So you've probably got the same situation in a church of 300. It's just when there's 20 of you, and you've got 5 people who basically saying, "I'm too tired, I don't want to do anything." And you've got 5 people who are basically bored and want to change the world. It's in your face.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes, I think you've got 2 or 3 options really. One, which I think is probably the safe option, which is the normal one probably, which is basically is to make sure that whatever you're going to do allows the 5 not to come. So sometimes you need to say, hey, we're going to do this, it's going to up the pace, but fundamentally that doesn't mean all 20 of us have to attend everything. We realise you've got families, you've got jobs, etc., etc. Okay, so that's probably the norm. Okay, which is understanding that your church plant is actually is built up of people in different stages of their life. There are occasions, and I've done this. We had our second church plant in Manchester in this series of church plants. It was in Fallowfield, and we had about, I don't know, 30 or 40 people, I think. And we wanted, that was an evening meeting, we wanted to start in the morning, plant a new congregation in the morning. So I said to some of them, I said, look, I know you're busy. Could you give me 2 months and double up? If we did that, we'll get some traction. If you do 3 months, that would be brilliant. Students are coming in. If you could just give us a real, the kind of short bit of energy time, and if we could all do that as much as possible, then actually we can actually make this happen. And because it was time specific, because people totally understood the gain, actually and again, you always let people in the end, if they can't, they can't, but we really did maximize everybody, and actually now got 2 kicking plants there. In fact, I've planted 2 out of that since then. So, but you can't do that often.
Yeah. You're saying about giving permission for people to not be part of something if they're overstretched, or you've got for a time specific thing, for a burst. What about if you've got people that are wanting to run ahead? They want the prayer meeting, they want this, they want all these things you want to hold back.
You've got to rein them in a little bit. I think that's, Paul. I'm sure Paul wanted to get in, do the church plant into Corinth. He could have even had Aquila and Priscilla saying, "Come on, we'll support you." I'm reading that into it. Obviously, that's not in the narrative, but it's the sort of conversation I've often had. I think you've actually got to say there's times and there's seasons, and I think actually really helping people to look at some of these biblical examples. I literally do teach the show, and I actually say, look, this is how Paul did it, and he reined himself in till everything was okay. And actually, I think sometimes it's helpful to go to the Bible. I mean, it's always helpful to go to the Bible, obviously, but it's helpful to actually go to the Bible narrative. That's what I mean. So it's not just you, and because they'll ask you, Colin, but actually to actually give some biblical illustrations helps. But yeah, I think you've got to rein some people in. Occasionally, you can actually let them not move on. You can say, if you 2 want to do it, then God bless you, but please do not get upset if the other 18 don't. And that's so. Occasionally, you can actually make it that way, but definitely, you don't want to go. You don't want to be running this thing with the fastest pace people, and you definitely don't want to be held up by the very slowest pace people.
Very good. Yeah, we've got a phrase that we use, which is, you don't need permission to do kingdom business, to release people to get on and do the stuff in the Bible. So,
when they put pressure on everybody else, and emotional pressure, and a notice at the front saying, you must turn up next week, then,
yeah.
Okay.
Um, this one, because we've got a couple more to get through, so I'm conscious of time. This one's great because this question is from somebody who obviously listens to you and knows you. Colin often talks about momentum, and I think you've covered this, but I wanted to ask the question: how does this relate to pace? Because you talked about the bursts, so you might want to comment on that.
That's an excellent question, because effectively momentum is hard to get and easy to lose. And anybody who's a church leader knows this. And so the temptation then to actually keep pushing hard because you're scared of losing momentum is really it's a killer. But it's got to be managed. And so I think sometimes you've just got to be very wise. And so, for instance, let's just use a very recent example for us. We've got two congregations into a more student area. So basically, by the time end of May comes, there's just a few left, and we've tried to keep one of the meetings going through the summer in the evening, and we actually decided this year to pull the plug. And we really were fearful that we would lose momentum because, well, at least I was. Didn't say that to many people, but I knew we had to because we needed a break. Fundamentally, I think we're planting pretty regularly now, and we just needed that group to have a break. So, but what we did was we really worked hard at the very beginning of when we finished the break. We knew we'd got to get momentum back again, and therefore we had we'd worked out a strong plan of how we were going to get momentum. Now, because it's more in student, it's easier because of freshers coming in and things like that. But still, that whole thing of keeping the momentum going. So you can have breaks and not lose momentum. That's definite. The other thing is we sometimes would do stuff like I'm using the summer because it just it's in my head because we've just gone through the summer period, so that's where all my illustrations come from. But sometimes I'll say to a church planter, okay, work hard, get some momentum. If you need a break through summer from your Sunday meetings, why not put a barbecue on? Why not get a summer program that keeps the momentum there but depowers the setup, the preaching, the having to prepare preaching, but actually you're not kind of closing everything down. So I think sometimes people go from fast to stop, and actually you can be much more cleverer. And sometimes you can engage other people, because running a barbecue every Sunday lunchtime or Wednesday night for 4 weeks actually is life to somebody.
Yes.
And in a sense that, so you're keeping it going. I'm just using it because we've just gone through the summer period, but I've often taught some church planters to use the holiday periods very wisely. So I was with a church planter last year, and they've got a handful of people. They import people to help the Sunday meeting work. So I this very let's get the momentum going through term times, the UK English school times. Have breaks through the school holiday times, but keep things going midweek. To keep activities going that actually are low maintenance and probably don't demand the leader.
Yeah, no, that's really, really helpful. Good answer. So talking about not overloading yourself and trying to pace yourself well like that and using clever ideas and creativity, a question about then burning out. So someone's asked the question, what do you mean by burnout?
But what do I mean by burnout? I mean, a breakdown would be the ultimate burnout, that people just basically, their bodies say, you've got to stop, So I think people get emotional burnout, and there's levels, isn't there? So Um, I know sometimes I've been close to an emotional, just basically feeling like I've got nothing else to give. I'm tired. I'm just going through the motions now. My wife knows I'm going through the motions. My kids know I'm going through the motions. I know I'm going through the motions. So that is a kind of total burnout, but you're on, there's not much left in the tank. So basically, the main thing is you don't want to get there. You really want to try and make sure that you don't want to have a breakdown. That's when fundamentally your body says stop, effectively. So that's what I mean. It's making sure, and we're always going to be tired. There's always going to be times of tiredness, but it's having the ability to regain energy. So I have occasionally been on a summer holiday, and actually I've not recovered enough because I've been so drained. Well, I would say it takes me a week to even get onto an even keel. And so, in fact, we started taking 3 weeks break when I was in a high intense church planting time and actually doing training and lots of other things. We actually realised I needed a 3 week away, and the first week was just to recover, to actually get myself. So, in a sense, you don't really want to. That's pacing at a high level.
Yeah, well, that's a helpful definition. I mean, there was a question asked about how, as a church planter, do you avoid that when you're going through when you've got the quicker growth season going on? So you're wanting to maximize what's going on, but at the
Yeah.
same time, you're obviously having to give that much more of yourself as well.
Yeah, holidays for us, and that's why I went to those first four principles: Sabbaths, holidays, the festivals. I've already got booked my 4 holidays for 2018, 17, 18 would be nice as well.
That's
Um,
planning.
yes, and I've got them budgeted. I'm not saying I've got all the money, but I know that they're there. That I've booked them all, um, and so that actually shapes my year next year. And what happens is that sometimes I haven't done that. The church has shaped my year, and I've put my holidays in after the shape, and then basically I'm then suffering all the way through. So I think it's so important to know who you are, to know the season. So now, because our kids are grown up, we have all our holidays at different times. When the kids were there, we had to have a school holiday. It was very fascinating for me that when our kids left home, I always thought I was good at pacing myself, good at holidays. Kids left home, and I thought I don't need to have them in the high cost season. I'll have them outside of that. But actually, I had no kind of rhythm. Where do I put them? So actually, I spent 2 years behind the curve on something that I thought I'd cracked 20 years ago. And I would say it's taken me 2 or 3 years to get a new rhythm. I'm 60, grandkids, and I've just had to rework it to get the pace right. So I don't know if that's
Yeah,
so yeah.
no,
So it's really making sure if you're going at a high pace, you need high break, high pace, high break.
yeah, okay, that's brilliant. One question, I'm conscious of time. We've got one kind of curveball here about bivocational ministry, and what are the key things to think about if you're going for bivocational ministry? What kind of jobs work best for this?
So, well, not everybody has the option of choosing the best job for it, but I think if I had started again, I trained as an engineer, and basically it was really impossible to do that and go part time with that stuff. So it was not a very the type of engineering that I was in, and in the season, in the in the times when I trained in that. So I think that I mean some nurses sometimes can do part time, so it's a very high stress job, but sometimes you can, some of these jobs you can actually do, are easier to do part-time. Um, so I think it's a little bit of who you are. It's also, I've got people on my team who've got jobs that are probably way less demanding than their ability. Actually, it means that they've got more headspace and more emotional energy. So I'm not giving you an answer about the jobs, but I'm just saying
Yeah,
sometimes,
no, it's helpful answer, but not specifically about
sometimes
your
I
job.
guess what I'm trying to say is you sometimes you can go for jobs that actually could eventually give you a part-time option, and they can be well paid, or the type of work that actually you can do shifts and stuff like that. Uh, you could go for a job that actually doesn't overstress you, so that actually you're not coming back overloaded from a day job. For most church planters, it will be bivocational. So,
Yeah.
and I think the reality is your church plant speed will be in proportion to your time and emotional energy that you can give it. And therefore, if you've got a high emotional job, when you say emotional, it's draining you, then obviously you've got to watch that you you can only do a limited amount. So it's fine. I don't mind if a church takes 10 years to make it. I prefer that and everybody's intact. And I think I think sometimes we put too much weight on time. Just, it's got to be today. We've got to get 30 today. It's no, I've been in 20 years in Manchester, and we've had some church plants that take a long time, some just go like that. And in the end, we're building the kingdom. So I think it's pacing yourself against the job. So I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant 'cause it's all about capacity, isn't it? So where are
Yeah.
you using your capacity? Okay, let's go with the final question, which brings us back to some wisdom and advice someone's after for when things are going slow. Are there things that they can do to increase the pace, or is it just a case of waiting? So someone's obviously in a bit of a slow
Yeah,
season.
yeah,
What can
yeah.
they do? What's your wisdom?
What's my wisdom? Um, get people like me to talk to them. Genuinely, sometimes you just need an outside look. Now, that would be my first port of call, because sometimes you can be so much in it that you kind of you go two ways. You either become fatalistic, i.e., this is as it is,
Yeah.
or you become so frustrated that actually you try and push it along. Sometimes, actually, you just need some keys to change. So a building sometimes can be a game changer. So sometimes I've been into them and they've been a little bit slower, and I've said, "Why are you there? It's cold room, you know." Move somewhere else. I mean, we've got one church plant that actually was in a big hall, rattling around. There was a little social club, which is where they are now, bricked up windows. I mean, we looked at it for I think 2 years. I thought you can't build a church there. It's just it was bricked up because it was in an area that so it's not worth putting any glass in. Actually, it's, in the end, made a decision. Where it's not working for us here. Let's move there. And literally from that moment, new people came. Just it was literally half a mile down the road. A mile down the road. So sometimes it's a building, sometimes it's an extra person. Sometimes it's yeah. There's just a number of things, and so I go back to my first thing. Sometimes you need someone who's a bit
Yeah.
of a lateral thinker. I think a lot. We do these things called masterclasses, and which is basically linking 3 or 4 church planters together every 6 weeks. I go on a lot of them. We often run German-speaking ones. We have them quite a few in the UK now. And really, what it is actually these are the very things that we talk about. So it just allows practitioners for an hour to have a hangout. We're all online, and really, one of the things we do is, where are you? And if someone says exactly the question, that's where we are, then we all chat about it, and everybody brings in their thoughts, and in the end, we all pray together. And actually, sometimes you just need an outside voice, effectively, and sometimes you can't see the wood for the trees. Effectively, you're too in there.
Yeah.
Hopefully
Well,
that was
oh, that's hugely helpful. And you know what? That wraps it up nicely because you've just done a great advert at the end of our time together. It's pretty much past. So, Colin, I just want to, I think we're done there really. And I just want to thank you. Obviously, I think there was a couple more questions again tonight, which is just brilliant. So thank you for everyone who's watching live and asking and contributing, because obviously we want to, as they say, scratch where you're itching. You guys get another opportunity to discuss this topic of pace. In 2 weeks' time, we have got another broadcast, so that's the 24th of November. We're going to be joined by Mark Mumford, who heads up the Salt and Light group of churches in the UK. So please join us for that. I think hopefully he's going to be sharing some of his story, or certainly some of the stories of the churches he's involved in, and definitely we can add these questions, or there'll be more questions I'm sure on the subject of pace, how to pace a church plant. So as Colin said, if tonight your kind of thoughts provoked, or when you're listening to this online and you're thinking, I want to get involved in a masterclass because I want to discuss kind of our situation in a more personal way with a group of other church planters, please email us at Broadcast Network. Go on the website, and obviously there's a way of putting in your details, and just put that as your question that you want to get linked in. So we have one more broadcast, like I said, on the 24th of November. That's our last broadcast for this year. Thank you to Colin for tonight. Thank you all of those of you who have tuned in live, and those of you subsequently who are listening online, because it's hopefully a thing that is encouraging for you and is helpful. So we've loved spending our time with you this evening. Until next time, see you then.